Good.
And
All right, buddy. I saw the blue button turn on. I think that means you're recording.
yeah,
All right, good stuff.
I got the music going, everything.
Oh, we got some tunes.
Yeah, always same intro, same
intro. We haven't changed it up.
Nope,
We've adopted this music.
nope.
This is going to become part of the fabric.
It is, I think.
Okay.
All right, now I'm going to turn off the music. We're going to start the
This is
show.
why big companies have brand police.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right.
What are we doing here? Talking about some digital experience workshops, eh?
That's right.
All
Go
right,
forward. Let's talk about. There we go. Our introductions. You already know us. We're well introduced.
You got it. Yeah. And
Yeah.
we would love you to endorse us with one of those social gestures on your platform that you happen to be watching this on. So
Hit the subscribe, like button,
thank
whatever
you.
it is.
All right. This is part of a whole ongoing series. We do this once a month. So stay tuned for more. We want to touch on, little digestible elements of a wholesome digital experience that are going to help you elevate your digital experience in the way that you do this. Today, we're going to talk about web accessibility.
That's right.
I think this is a pretty meaty one
Yes.
in terms of all the ones that we do. There's a lot to go over here. So we're not going to be going through
Everything.
every rule. We're going to be going through concepts, process, approach, mindset for getting this and doing this right.
I would agree. Yeah. There's just too much
Yeah.
to cover if we tried to go through.
And there's a resource. We always make a resource available in every one of these workshops. The link is there on the screen. We'll put it in the comments as well. That'll take you to our web accessibility white paper. The key thing that we're going to pull up here is there's a checklist included in that white paper. So you'll end up with a document that looks like this. It's got lots of helpful information, but you want to sort of review some of the things that you need to be thinking about when you're putting your content and your website together. So look for this checklist one page, or it's towards the end of the document as sort of the real nugget that you can find in that document. All right, that's the setup. Let's get into it. What is it? And I like to describe this by talking a lot about what it is not.
I'm in the same mindset.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not a regulation. It's not just a regulation. There are jurisdictions where this is a regulation, and we're in Ontario. And
But would you agree that a lot of times that we'll get the call is because of the regulation?
well, in our market,
that's-
yeah. I mean,
And
there
that's
is
what we discuss with the
Yes.
customer. It's
Yes.
not about the regulation.
yeah. There are laws to follow, and again,
Correct.
in Ontario, you have to follow the law, and this is one of them. But if you do this right, it is more than just that rule. The benefits and what this does for you is not just about compliance.
Correct. Yes.
Right.
Absolutely.
Like, what would you say are the benefits of having good web accessibility? What else do you get out of having a good, properly accessible website?
Well, just going off of how we look at user experience in the first place,
Right.
if you have web accessibility kind of baked in, it helps define user experience,
That's right.
right?
Yeah.
Because if you're
Like a
following
good,
common
accessible-
practices,
Yeah.
then you're already on the path of better user experience than what I've seen in the market when they don't have it. Because what ends up happening is you need to follow, if you're using web experience, you have to follow good design practice.
Right.
So when you're creating, say, a design system and
Yeah.
you're using web accessibility as one of those tools to
Right.
follow,
Sort of one of those guidelines. Yeah. Yeah.
one of those guidelines, you will have a much better design system coming
will.
out of it
Yep.
than if you didn't, involve it at all.
And the same thing goes. It's this filter that you pass your content through that simplifies it, makes it more clear, makes it easier to navigate, and that actually presents a better user experience. And do you know what else benefits from all of that good user experience?
SEO?
Oh, it's like you're reading the slide.
I am. I am.
So Google will recognize that your site is set up to be well consumed by able-bodied and otherwise users, and you'll get a boost in your SEO.
You'll get a significant boost. I don't think people understand that Google moved that part of SEO back in 2016 and heavily redefined how your search engine is crawled.
Right.
If you have like
How your site's crawled by.
how your site's crawled. Like if you don't have ARIA standards, your site won't get crawled well.
Right.
The easiest way to look at that is just go through Search Console. You'll see it on the far right, and it'll actually show you.
Or call us. Okay, so again, let's get into sort of some of the more substantive parts of this. Link to that white paper there again. I must be clicking the wrong way here. All right.
There we go.
The intent of web accessibility, and this is sort of baked into all the rules and guidelines that encompass web accessibility, is that you want your experience to be perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. Okay, so if you follow those 4 principles, if you understand what those mean, and without even knowing what the actual rules are, you'll get pretty far along the journey to having a properly accessible website.
That's right.
There's a bit of a nuance and a sort of delicate definition here. So perceivable means that you can actually interpret the content appropriately. So a good example of this is why there are alt tags with images.
Correct.
If you have a vision impairment, you cannot perceive any information that is embedded in an image. So you need the ability to perceive the context and the information that's being communicated to everybody else in that image.
Yes.
Operable means you have to be able to navigate and interact with the site without having to use a mouse, by using a keyboard or other assistive devices, so that any buttons, next, previous, links, play, pause, all of that kind of stuff has to be accessible without interacting with those UI elements on the page.
Yes.
Understandable means that there's no confusion about what the content is trying to say to you. And a good example of that is where you have a list of information where you sort of summarize, and then you have an article that allows you to read more. So read more links are bad. There's a way to do them, but generally speaking, that does not make for an understandable website for somebody that is using a screen reader, that is interacting with your content in a sort of alternate way. And so if you don't accommodate for that, it's a very confusing message and it's not understandable.
Correct.
And then robust essentially means that the experience that you're delivering needs to be consistent and equal across those formats. If you have a page that's built sort of for an able-bodied audience, it has to be just as thorough, just as robust, just as consumable for any other audience with an accessibility preference.
And also with robust, with customers, they go, oh, it's the website that we're focused in on.
Right.
But we're talking about links.
Oh, I know where you're
talking about documents.
Absolutely.
And that's where robust comes in. So if you have documents that need to be read, if you have, if it pulls you into a portal, if it pulls you into whatever there is within that site, that's where robust operates.
That's a very good point. So all of this is encompassed in the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. Do you want to just switch the screen so that you can read that last point? This is more sort of commonly known as WCAG, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. There are levels of sophistication and complexity that are built into these guidelines. And then every few years, they revise what those guidelines are. So even if you're, at the entry level sort of accessibility level A, they might make a revision to what that means in version 2.2 or 2.3. And this is sort of the moment to emphasize why it's important to not think of accessibility as a one and done situation. You need to sort of keep up to speed with your content, your infrastructure, what the guidelines are, how they've evolved, how web browsers have evolved, how your experience has evolved. So most of the time we're looking at level AA and version 2.1, which is the current published version.
Correct.
By the time you're watching this video, it might have moved to 2.2 because we're expecting that to be released any day now.
That's correct.
Some businesses shoot for AAA, and that's great. It's a very rigorous threshold, and a lot of times we might sort of take as much of those guidelines and bring them forward as we possibly can. But that is a sort of like the most thorough set of guidelines you can follow.
Yeah, and for the most part, I believe AA handles most cases.
Yeah. All right. We've already sort of touched on some of this. You want to sort of comment on where you think some of those most common mistakes surface, or which one on that list you think you've seen the most?
Oh, the non-text elements. Probably, I think
it's the one that everybody knows too.
Yeah, and everybody knows that. The images. The one again I always see is so if you've ever used an application or a platform that is for disability, such as JAWS.
Right, so it's a screen reader.
So it's a screen reader, and it's one that is followed the most, by the way. And you go through sites. It's amazing when you go to try and tab through a site that hasn't been optimized, just how difficult it is.
Like often we might coach somebody to say, why don't try it?
Yeah.
Interact with your own website using JAWS, which is basically a browser that helps people with accessibility needs interpret that information and see what it's doing to render your site and communicate that information. And it will be quite revealing where some of the gaps are.
And if it can't go through it, you'll notice that there are references in Search Console where Google can't go through it as well.
Right? Back to that point about sort of search being one of the benefits here. Yeah.
So again, I know everybody has to attach to ROI. Right? And sometimes this is a minor point in an organization that might not put web accessibility first.
Right.
But attaching, say, SEO, which is probably as important to your organization, you can do that and say to whoever you need to, this is why we're doing it.
Right. You brought up the file and download comment a couple of moments ago. I'll just reiterate that is one that it gets neglected quite frequently.
All the time.
You post a PDF, your annual report, your white paper. You've done all this work to optimize your website for accessibility, but you forget that this PDF or other document, once it gets posted on your website, becomes part of that digital experience and also has its own filter. You got to put that document through because there are things you need to do to an actual PDF file to make it accessible. And other document formats.
And I do notice the headings. This, and again, if you're looking at accessibility as one of the tools to help you build the best user experience, number one is a lot of sites we look at, they're H1, H2, H3. They don't necessarily follow like an organizational.
Right. So the point here and the rule and the requirement you're trying to follow is that you have to have those heading levels. These are H2. We're getting a bit technical, but there's HTML heading tags, H1, H2, H3, form the structure of the headings on your page. And you are not supposed to skip levels. You cannot have a heading 1 and then some text and then the next heading be an H3, because a screen reader is trying to organize the information on that page, or other assistive devices are trying to organize that information by heading, by structure. And if you skip levels, it doesn't know if that third level heading belonged to a different second level heading. So it can get quite confusing.
And the paragraphs within it.
Yes, exactly.
And that's what happens is if you've got a ton of H3s, you skip H4, and then a ton of H6s, and it's trying to understand where that structure is for the paragraphs. The person trying to listen through a screen reader, or they're trying to operate, they're just going to get lost.
Trying to navigate through the page.
Yeah.
The reason this is done, I think most of the time, the reason this is done is because the content author likes the look of the H3 style more than, and thinks it's more appropriate for the layout of the page than the style they get when they choose H2. So they go, oh, H3, that looks good. That looks better. I'm going to use that.
Yeah.
So don't do that. There are other ways to get your styles correct that are independent from the style applied by selecting the right heading tag.
And again, we'll just go back to the fact, if you're considering web accessibility when you start your project, there you go. In the design system, you'll know not to create H tags
proper,
that
like,
are,
again, it's technical, but you want
designs.
You want your styles defined separately from your tag structure and your tag styles, so that you can mix and match them, and you can apply a style from your design system to any heading tag and have it look right, regardless of which heading level it's supposed to be. Okay, I think we've beaten that one to death.
Yep.
Captions used to be neglected and a pain in the butt because you had to do it manually, and with voice to text recognition engines, and YouTube does it automatically, LinkedIn does it automatically. When you record a video, it's so easy now to send it through a voice recognition engine and get the transcript generated for you. There's no reason not to do captions.
Yeah, and the only argument I would say is somebody has to review it. If you have a lot of content, or even a little, just have somebody review to make sure. If when we do ours, I will review it, because if there's a lot of acronyms, if there are words that are not common in the language, then we have to look at it.
Right. Very good point. We've talked about motion and interacting with slideshows and play and pause buttons and whatnot. Anything that's a time-based survey or gamification experience, that kind of thing, you have to allow for controls that allow the user to sort of slow down that interaction or engage with it, through means that don't require a mouse. So I think that's important not to forget.
And the keyboard controls, which we went over.
Okay, so that's, if you remember nothing, remember these things. How do you know if you've done this properly? So there's sort of 3 levels of monitoring that you can employ. Baked into your browser, there are the dev tools that have a feature for doing a check of the accessibility on the page that you have open in the browser. So you can, and there's other tools and plugins that you can use for just opening up a page and hitting a button and scanning that page. Super helpful when you are a content author and you've just published a new page or a post and you want to check that one new thing that you've done. That's great, but they're not good for scanning an entire site. They don't do that. They don't operate that way. So then there are other tools that you can use. Turn it on demand, put in your URL, scans the whole site, off you go. And then sort of the most sophisticated tools are constantly running. They're constantly catching any deviation so that you can have a very timely posture for reacting to any deviation from accessibility. And usually tools like that will also catch other sort of governance infractions that you might be wanting to look for.
Correct.
So the single page checking is a browser plugin. The on-demand one, we use a tool called SortSite. Continuous monitoring, it is a tool like SiteImprove.
Yeah.
Any other tools to add to that?
Shout out to Crown Peak because they actually have it built into their CMS. They bought from Evidon and Active Standards and built it in. And it's actual governance, digital governance. That means if somebody goes in to build a page and does not check accessibility, they can't publish the page.
Okay.
And it's an amazing tool because it actually stops people from being able to do anything without following the mandates and principles set out by the organization as a whole. So
sounds like a good resource for a enterprise company that wants to really make sure and doesn't want any legal issues.
Yeah, well, because lawyers are expensive and they get involved very early on in the process. So if you create that governance, which probably cost you quite a bit to create the governance model,
right,
and then all of a sudden you get down to the end and that person may not know. It might not be known. Having something like a Crown Peak or even Site Improve on the light side still has to be managed. Right. But that's what I got that. So shout out to Crown Peak just because it's the only tool I know that does this.
Okay, cool. If you're not an enterprise business, lots of other tools though to keep an eye on this, and it may not stop you in your tracks, but it will definitely be help you
look at Google Chrome, IBM's Google Chrome plugin. Perfect. There's usually a ton there.
Great. So we talked about the approach and the process for getting this right and maintaining the right cadence and health of your accessibility. It is not one and done, as I mentioned before. It is really important when you are doing this that you don't just run a scan and blindly start addressing red flags one after another. You do need to... Why?
We've just seen that too many times.
Right. Where you just kind of go, oh, this is a problem and I'm going to go fix it. And then you don't look at it in context of some of the other things that are on the page. The reason being, one, some of these tools don't always get it right. It's not actually an issue in the right context. You don't know that there's an accommodation for that issue addressed somewhere else, or you get a series of fixes or issues, and actually the root cause is something else. So by addressing something else, you resolve several issues. There might be a problem with your template. There might be an issue with the layout of your list or something like that. And if you fix the header, it cascades through,
Yeah. So if it is, again, if you've already done web accessibility, which I'm hoping as an organization you have, you do a little less. But as you know, if you're somebody who's really just going out there and saying how important it is now, that holistic approach is probably key. Yeah. Because every tool will show you, you'll get a list of like 100 and then they'll show which ones are the most important. And then that's where, again, that's why I'm laughing, because that's where I see but what caused that? What was the reason for it? What do you need to change? Like you said, from the design, what do you need from your design system, from your, content management it has to be baked into it. Right. So as you're archiving new content, as you're updating new content, just constantly has to be a part of that process.
And then think about, don't just get overwhelmed by this can be big. If you have a very content heavy site, if you have a lot of interactive experiences that you deliver, it can almost be impossible to know where to start and how to tackle it. There are alternative approaches to getting this right and addressing this and being in compliance and making sure that you're following the guidelines without necessarily having to directly modify every page. You can have alternate acceptable alternatives. Tread lightly. That's not a get out of jail free card at all. You have to do it right with the right intent, the right way. But just know that a good sort of conscious reflection of how this needs to be addressed for you is part of the right process here. And then we've talked about the fact that these things drift. There's version revisions, there's browser changes, there's new content that gets published all the time. And you need to make sure that that's part of the not one and done, but that you have therefore an established routine and regularity to reviewing this. So
Yeah.
do you have in your calendar a quarterly review? Have you given somebody the mandate? Have you hired somebody to help you with this? What is the schedule? What is the frequency? Are you being, getting the reports and getting the accountability communicated to you to make sure that this is not just sort of a afterthought?
That is part of your content management plan.
There you go. So back to that white paper and what we have sort of outlined for you. If you go to that link, we go through the same concepts, but in a bit more detail. We give you a little bit more background on accessibility and how it all came to be. We get into the rules. We talk about even fixing PDFs and other elements. And then sort of towards the end, we have that checklist that we talked about. We briefly outlined sort of the global state of accessibility in different jurisdictions, but always check sort of your local situation. Great resource. If you need anything else, of course, let us know. This is part of our ongoing series, as we mentioned. So the next one we're going to do is about personalization. So join us on September 21st if you're viewing this beforehand. If you're viewing this after, click next in our list of in our video playlist to catch up on that recording as well. If you want to know more about accessibility at Flywheel, we've got flyw.co/A11Y. And our whole workshop series is at flyw.co/DXW. We hope to see you on the next one.
All right.
Thanks, everybody.
Take care.